Have you ever wanted to play an archer who is able to mow down hordes of enemies while simultaneously charging their arrows with arcane or divine magic? If this sounds like you, then you are an arcane archer. My name is Coleman Webb. Welcome to Limit Break 20, and today we are going to be building the Arcane Archer in Daggerheart. So grab your longbow, strap on your quiver, and let's build an Arcane Archer. So first, let's talk about the archetype of this character. The way that I envision playing an Arcane Archer is really being an archer first. So that means that we are primarily going to be using short bows and long bows for our attack, and we want to make sure that we're really good and proficient with that. Next, we want to make sure that we are able to use attacks that are going to be dishing out magic damage as well. And so this is really going to create that spell bow sort of flavor and fantasy that we want to play at the table. And the other thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we are as accurate as possible. And that's important because I think anytime we see an archer in any fantasy archetype, like for example Legolas in Lord of the Rings, we see him just hitting people all the time, close, far away, in quick succession. And so we're really going to build something today that fits that flavor. So let's get into it. Now, as always, when I do builds, I want to build these characters as close to core rules as possible. And while Daggerheart is very flexible and allows you to homebrew and make things in really whatever way you want to, I am really trying to make sure we're sticking to the right weapons tables as well as abilities. So trying to limit homebrew and staying close to core. That's the key. As far as starting class, we are going to be going Ranger. One of the things I really like about the Ranger is their Hope class ability. It is called Hold Them Off, and let's read it. You spend 3 hope when you succeed on an attack with a weapon to use the same roll against 2 additional adversaries within the range of the attack. I absolutely love this. Now, one thing that is very important to know is that this is when you are making attacks with your weapons. So, as we build this character out, there are some things that aren't necessarily going to be weapon attacks, even though we will be making them with our bow. At least that's how I envision this character deploying some of their domain abilities. Next, we are going to move into their class feature, and this is called Ranger's Focus. So let's read what it says. You spend a hope to make an attack against a target. On a success, deal your attack's normal damage and temporarily make this attack's target your focus. Until the feature ends or you make a different creature your focus, you gain the following benefits against your focus. You know precisely what direction they are in. When you deal damage to them, they must mark a stress. And when you fail an attack against them, you can end your Ranger's Focus feature to reroll your duality die. Okay, so that's a lot there. Now, one of the things that is important to note is that this focus effect takes place after you've made a successful attack. So this means on subsequent attacks, you are going to be getting these benefits. And really, the biggest and most important is going to be that bottom one, which is when you fail an attack, you can re-roll your duality die. I think that that is an amazing feature. I mean, the fact that you are effectively spending a hope to potentially re-roll that duality die, I think that's very worthwhile. So, one thing to know about this character is that just with their class features, we are going to be using hope quite a bit. So this is going to be what I call a hopeless character. So not that it's going to be a terrible character to play at your table, but when I say it's a hopeless character, it's just somebody that's going to be using their resources quite often. As for our ancestry, we are going to be taking a mixed ancestry. And today we are going to be taking a human and a simian. The way ancestries work in Daggerheart is that you can mix an ancestry, but you have to take the top feature from one of those ancestries and the bottom feature of another one and combine them. You can't have 2 bottom features or 2 top features. So here's what we're taking. So from human, we are going to be taking high stamina. So the ranger also is going to be using quite a bit of stress. So they're going to be stressed out and hopeless, I guess. So a stressed out character, just someone that's going to be using stress quite a bit. So the reason we are going with the high stamina is because we get an additional stress slot at character creation. So we go from 6 to 7. Now, when I was creating this character, I felt like that the Arcane Archer was very Fey oriented, and I really considered taking Furbolg and Fairy and having some of those features mixed. But there's a couple of reasons why I didn't take that mechanically, and I'll go over with those with you guys a little bit later on. But the big one for Furbolg is that they actually have a really cool feature where they can, if you mark a stress, you roll 1d6, and if you roll a 6, then you end up not marking a stress. And that can be really helpful. However, when you do the math on it, if you roll 6d6 die, the odds of you rolling a 6 on one of those dice is about almost 67%. And so the question is that, yeah, we could burn through all our stress that we would be potentially marking and have a 67% chance to have one of those not proc, or we could just take a bird in the hand and get an additional stress slot. Also, the way I kind of see it is that more than likely you'll be getting a short or a long rest in between combat. This isn't always the case. I've been there and it is brutal, but if you do get a short rest, you might be able to recover some of those additional stress slots. So something to keep in mind when you're trying to pick a character, but that's one of the reasons why I didn't take Furbolg. As for our second feature that we're going to be taking, we are going to be taking the Nimble feature from Simia. And what this does is this just gives us a permanent +1 to our evasion. And that's awesome. Just being able to increase our defenses right from the gate is huge. And when I think about this character being a human and a Simia mix, the way I kind of pictured in my head is maybe looking at like Goku from Dragon Ball when he still had his tail. I think that that would be kind of an appropriate way to look at that, or maybe Zidane from Final Fantasy IX. So those are, I think, two types of characters you can kind of keep in the back of your mind when you're creating this character. As for our community, we are going to be taking Wildborn. And I think communities are very, very flexible in Daggerheart. So if you decide that there's something that fits your character better, feel free to take it. But I really like the Wildborn feature, especially for this character, because they have Lightfoot, which is makes it so your movement is naturally silent. You have an advantage on rolls to move without being heard. I really think that this applies almost to every stealth check you would make in a TTRPG. No one's making a stealth check saying, I hope I'm not quiet when I walk, right? So that to me really makes sense because we really do want this character to fit that ranger role. And I think being able to sneak and to track in a stealth-like manner is really, really important. So for starting equipment, we are going to be taking a short bow, at least for me. You could take a longbow as well, but one of the things about the longbow, it has the cumbersome property, which basically gives us a -1 to finesse. And as I previously mentioned, we want to be at least proficient in stealth. And so being able to sneak and move without taking that penalty, I think is really important. Now, you could maybe have both. And if you know you're going to be in a combat, swap to your longbow. But really, you're talking the difference between a D6 and a D8, and that's just going to be 1 point of damage. So for me, not to take the penalty for stealth makes sense, but you can do whichever you'd like. Both the short and longbow have the two-handed burden property, so we won't be taking a secondary weapon. For armor, we are going to be taking Gambeson armor. And the reason for that is because the Gambeson armor gives us a feature called flexible, which gives us +1 to our evasion. For this character, we're not going to really focus as much on damage thresholds and trying to increase those and having the highest armor score possible. We're going to be focused on making it so we are as difficult to hit as possible. And having Gambeson armor really helps us out with that by increasing our evasion. As far as traits go for this character, one of my favorite things about this character is that they are going to be single trait dependent, or STD. We're probably going to have to come up with a different acronym. But what that basically means is that agility is going to be their primary stat for everything we do, shooting our bow as well as our spellcasting trait. To me, that is amazing because what that makes it is that you don't have to pick the weapon that your character wants to use, and then also have to be able to have a different modifier for casting spells. It all works as one. Even when we built the Eldritch Knight last week or so, what happened was is that if we wanted to use a sword, we had agility as the ability to use a broadsword, which is fine. It was still our second highest trait. But for us, focusing on agility is great, and then we can kind of pick what we want to be good at for the party. Some other plus ones I'd recommend taking is finesse and instinct. I think these are part of the recommended stats that Daggerheart gives us. But for me, I swapped out strength as my -1 and gave my presence a 0 just so I'm not taking a penalty to social checks. I also view this character as being more Fey magical, so being able to charm or deceive, I think, is important, and just taking a -1 penalty doesn't seem great. So as long as nothing heavy falls on me, I think I'm going to be okay. As I mentioned, +1 to finesse and +1 for instinct, because these are the stealth as well as the track and navigate features. And so being able to be someone in that party that can do some of those things is going to be very, very helpful. As for our subclass, we are going to be going Wayfinder. So let's read what it does. With Wayfinder, you get two features. The first is called Ruthless Predator, and when you make a damage roll, you can mark a stress to gain a +1 bonus to your proficiency. Additionally, when you deal severe damage to an adversary, they must mark a stress. This is awesome. This just allows us to use our stress to increase the damage die we roll for this character by 1. And using this, I could see where you would possibly want to maybe use a longbow instead of a short bow. So take both if you can. Then the other one that they get is called the Path Forward, which is when you're traveling to a place you've previously visited or you carry an object that has been at that location before, you can identify the shortest, most direct path to your destination. And that's great. This is just a fantastic feature to use for a campaign where you're doing a lot of traveling. We are playing in a Wither Wilds campaign right now, and I know our ranger has used this quite a bit. So being able to have this is huge. But let's be honest, we're here for that sweet, sweet damage increase. So you're welcome. I'm just saying the quiet part out loud. Now, the domain cards that rangers get are Bone and Sage. And so there's a few different ones that we want to take. So let's take a look here. The first domain card we'll be taking is Untouchable. And what this does is this gives us an increase to our evasion equal to half of our agility. And this is nice because right off the gate, we're just going to get an extra +1 to our evasion, which is big. So having domain cards that scale as you level up is really important because it allows you to hold on to them as you progress. And if something becomes more powerful as the game goes on, or at least keeps up with your power level, that's nice because then we can use it for a much longer period of time, which we will be seeing here in a moment. So the next domain card that we're going to be taking is Vicious Entangle. You make a spell cast roll against a target within far range. On a success, roots and vines reach out from the ground, dealing 1d8 +1 physical damage and temporarily restraining the target. Additionally, on a success, you can spend a hope to temporarily restrain another adversary within very close range to your target. All right, so this is awesome for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that it doesn't use any resources unless you want it to affect another adversary within close range. Um, I'm sorry, very close range. And that's nice because this just means that we can use it when we need to. And the other piece of it is that the restrained condition is extremely debilitating for an adversary. Let's read what it says. When you gain the restrained condition, you cannot move until this condition is cleared, but you can still take actions from your current position. So for a GM, when they hit the restrained condition, something has to happen and they have to describe how that is removed. And a lot of times this takes the entire spotlight from the GM in order for them to clear this condition. So I think it's fantastic, especially if there is an enemy who's particularly dangerous and they are away from the party or approaching the party. Using this is a really good way to just have some battlefield control and make sure you're playing a little bit of keep away from the really dangerous enemies. Also, the damage is a 1d8, so that feels nice. If you are using a short bow, get to roll that d8 even when you don't have it equipped. Now, one thing to keep in mind, you cannot combine this feature with Hold Them Off because Hold Them Off specifically states that you need to make a weapon attack in order for that in order to hit multiple adversaries. So just something to keep in mind. Those of us that have experience playing with an Arcane Archer in D&D 5th edition, one of the things that's really important is that this character is going to feel like that Arcane Archer right from level 1, and I love that. That's one of the goals for me whenever I do these builds. I want to get these characters online playing as close to the character archetype that they want to play, and almost right from the get-go. And one of the things that's really nice is that the Arcane Archer, while it really had some cool flavor with the different arrow types, which you could do, she could only do it twice per battle. I think maybe sometimes 3 times. And that kind of sucks because you take 2 turns and then you're just a regular archer. So because we have the domain cards that are going to give us some of this flavor and give us some really cool arcane-esque abilities, this is going to feel more sustainable and also going to feel like you are living that fantasy much better than I think you did in other systems. And by other systems, I mean D&D. Sorry, Wizards. Fix it. So now let's talk about some of your experiences. As I mentioned earlier, I want to create a character that is very, very accurate. So I am going to add a feature called Sharpshooter. And basically, anytime that I'm using a bow to make an attack roll, I'm going to want to spend a hope to add a +2 to it. Now, check with your GM because I'm a big fan of having abilities that both increase our chance to hit by spending a hope, as well as having something that's maybe a little more role play oriented. So, sharpshooter should be one to where you can try to get an increase if your roll is not quite high enough to hit. And again, as rules is written, you do have to declare that you're using your experience before you make the roll. So if you really want to make sure you're getting the attack off, that's important. But also not necessarily, because if you have a character that is your focus, you could just drop your focus and re-roll the duality die. So spend your resources wisely. Now, the next feature I would have is going to be Fey Charm. And again, I just feel like the Fey magic sort of fits the bill for the Arcane Archer. So Fey Charm is going to give me a +2 to my rolls for presence if I'm trying to convince something of someone. Maybe I'm not lying to them, but maybe it's a positive way. Like I'm just so charming that they can't say no. Let's talk about the tactics and how this character plays right here at level 1. So, at level 1, one thing that's really important is that we have prioritized our defense and not getting hit. So, Rangers start with an evasion of 12. We take a +1 from our Simia Nimble trait. We're going to take a +1 from our Gambeson armor, and we take a +1 from the Bone Domain for Untouchable. So, that right from the gate gives us a 15 on their evasion. So, to put this into perspective, if you are at level 1 and you are fighting a Jagged Knife Bandit, the Jagged Knife Bandit has a +1 to hit. And remember, your GM rolls a d20 in order to hit, as opposed to us rolling our 2d12s for the duality die. So that means that the GM has to roll a 14 or higher to hit you. So that means you have a 65% chance to dodge an attack if they just have a +1 modifier, and a 60 if they have a +2, which at level 1 is absolutely awesome and it feels great. You're really kind of living that fantasy where you are dodging attacks, hopefully, from your GM. Now, our thresholds are going to be a little bit lower because we're taking the Gambeson armor, but that's okay because we are significantly harder to hit. Now, because we took the short bow or long bow, we have a range of far. So one of the things that we are going to want to do is to be providing support for our party members. Now, one of the reasons I think that playing with an archer in particular as a ranger, as opposed to maybe even a dual wielding ranger that's using a broadsword and a short sword, or maybe even just a long sword, is because of their hold them off class hope trait. And what's nice about that is, remember, you can spend 3 hope to attack 2 additional allies within range of your weapon. Well, if you are using a weapon that has a range of melee, you're going to be very circumstantial as when you can use that. But using a bow, far range, that's going to be almost everybody. This is a really potent feature to use, and part of the reason why I say it's a hopeless character. The other thing that I would be particularly looking for when playing this character is cover. And one of the things that's nice about the rules in Daggerheart is that if your character is behind cover, where you are still exposed and not completely hidden from view, but maybe more difficult to hit, the attacks against you have disadvantage. And remember, disadvantage is a d6. So if an enemy's got to take a d6 roll against you, that is going to be on average a 3.5 reduction to the attack roll. So, figuring out if you are in a tavern trying to push up a table and take cover is going to really increase your defensive capabilities. Something to keep in mind. As I mentioned earlier, as we took the Vicious Entangle, domain card, being able to control the most powerful enemy on the battlefield is going to be really our specialty. So jumping out of cover, being able to hit them with that, and having them on the restraint condition is going to be key to really making sure that your party can focus on taking down the other more dangerous or less dangerous party members. Additionally, right at level 1, you are a control expert. Using Vicious Entangle, making it so you can restrain an enemy, is huge for making sure that your party can focus on either specific targets or helping to neutralize a more dangerous target in combat. So level 2. So at level 2, what we are going to do is that we are going to take a +1 bonus to 2 unmarked character traits. So we're going to be increasing our agility to A3 and our finesse to A2. So that is the first level of option that we're going to do. And then what we're also going to do is I'm going to have us choose an additional domain card, and I'll go over those right now. So the additional domain card we're going to take is I See It Coming, and let's read what it says. It says, when you are targeted by an attack made from beyond melee range, you can mark a stress to roll a d4 and gain a bonus to your evasion equal to the result against the attack. So this is pretty cool. So as long as an enemy is not attacking us with a weapon that is right next to us, like a long sword or a warhammer, something like that, even if they attack us with a reach weapon like a polearm, then we get to mark our stress to roll a d4 to increase our evasion. And the average on a d4 is 2.5, which is absolutely amazing. And most of the time, we're going to be trying to stay out of the fray. And so enemies are going to be hitting us with ranged attacks anyways. So this is going back to when I talked about the Ancestry. Why I didn't take Fairy is because Fairy gives you a feature very similar to this. You get to mark a stress and increase a flat +2 to your evasion, which is nice. And it does work for every attack, including melee attacks. However, if it's between that and choosing a guaranteed +1 to my evasion, right, which we get from Simia, and if we get to take this ability in the future, we would just have a little bit of redundancy because we'd have to mark 2 stress in order to increase our evasion. Granted, it's going up quite a bit, which would be fine. But I felt like that was a pretty strict resource for us to have. Now, if you really liked that and you thought Fairy was on point, you could just take that subclass feature and ignore this. But for me, I want to try to get the highest level of evasion we can with the least amount of resources spent. So this is why we went this route. And additionally, the way that I see this, if on average we are at 2.5 on the evasion roll and we have a guaranteed +1 from the Simia, then we're just up on evasion on average anyways. So I think it works out better. So the next domain card that we're going to be taking is in the Sage domain, and it is going to be Conjure Swarm. And let's read what it says. So you get Takaria Armored Beetles. You mark a stress to conjure armored beetles that encircle you. When you next take damage, reduce the severity by 1 threshold. You can spend a hope to keep the beetles conjured after taking damage. So this is nice. This is a good damage reduction feature. And for me, if I were going to be using this, one, it's nice that we can use it at any point in time. So we could mark the stress early and make sure that we have this extra damage reduction up, which is fantastic. And we can keep it going by spending hope or recast it by using stress. So this I really like because it gives me flexibility. If I have 5 or 6 hope because I've been rolling well and I take some damage, maybe I'm going to mark hope as opposed to mark another stress to keep this thing going. And again, it gives us another defensive option that we can use as well as a damage reduction, which I think is fantastic. But for me, the real reason that we're going to be taking this, that's the first one. But for me, feature that I think makes the most sense from Conjure Swarm is Fireflies. You make a spell cast roll against all adversaries within close range. You spend a hope to deal 2d8 plus 3 magic damage to all targets you succeed against. This is awesome for a couple of reasons. One is that we're dealing magic damage, and having a bow, we want to have some options of dealing magic damage in case we run across enemies that are resistant to them. The other thing that I like about this feature is that it has a really big area effect. This is everything within close range, which is defined as 10 to 30 feet away from you. So if you are surrounded, you can use this ability and deal really good damage to multiple enemies. This also may be a much more cost-effective use of hitting multiple targets than using Hold Them Off. And the reason being is because Hold Them Off takes 3 hope, this takes 1, and you're dealing effectively the same amount of damage that you would be doing with your short bow or even a long bow. When I think of Conjure Swarm, those armored beetles, I almost view them as like will-o'-the-wisps maybe, where those are going to be these magical like type of fairies that are going to be protecting me from damage. And then when I think of the fireflies, that is going to be an AoE blast. That's obviously going to be an explosive arrow, right? There's no way I'm going to be playing this character without having some awesome explosive arrow option, which is great. So flavor it how you want to, but for me and this character archetype that I'm specifically building, that's how I would view them using their abilities at the table. Level 3, we are going to be increasing our evasion by 1. This now bumps our evasion to 16. That's going to feel good. Having an evasion at 16, halfway through tier 2 of gameplay, it's going to feel fantastic. Now, the other thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to increase our stress slot by 1. So this now gives us 8 stress slots that we can use throughout the day, which is fantastic. So the level 4 domain card that we're going to be taking is Corrosive Projectile. You make a spell cast roll against a target within far range. On a success, you deal d6 plus 4 magic damage using your proficiency. Additionally, you mark 2 or more stress to make them permanently corroded. While a target is corroded, they gain a -1 penalty to their difficulty for every 2 stress you spent. This condition can stack. Okay, the first thing that stands out to me, which I think is awesome, is that this is doing d6 plus 4 using your proficiency, which means this ability does level up with you. So, like for example, in tier 2, we now have a proficiency of 2, so we're going to be rolling 2d6 plus 4, which is a little bit more damage than what we're doing with our bow, unless you've gotten like an improved short bow or something like that. So that's cool. Now, the other piece of it is that this is very stress intensive. So you are going to be marking 2 stress to reduce the difficulty of an enemy permanently by -1. So you could theoretically blow through 4 of your stress or all 8 of your stresses and reduce their difficulty by 4. Now, would I recommend doing that? No, but you could do it. So again, another reason why this character is just completely stressed out. Now, one thing I would say is that I'm kind of unclear on the interpretation of this. It says here, additionally, mark 2 or more stress to make them permanently corroded. I don't know if marking the stress is a condition of using corrosive projectile, or if you could just use it when you need to. If I were GMing this at my table, I wouldn't make a mandatory use of 2 stress to make an enemy corroded. And for a couple of reasons. One is that if you are using a bow and an enemy does have resistance, you could just use this instead, and this is going to be able to do full damage output. So again, giving your players the flexibility to use their abilities, I think is key, but every table is different. So make sure you ask your GM about the sort of how they would rule this before you take it or start to lean into it in combat, especially if you're fighting something that's really dangerous and you don't want to get caught flat-footed, which you shouldn't because you have a 16 evasion. At level 4, we are going to be permanently increasing our stress slot by another one, and we're going to increase our HP because I think it's time for us to get a little bit more survivability. I think that might be something that's important for this character to have. At level 4, I think that the domain card that we have to take is Death Grip. And this is from the Sage domain. You make a spell cast roll against a target within close range and choose one of the following options. You pull the target into melee range or pull yourself into melee range of them. You constrict the target and force them to mark 2 stress. And all adversaries between you and the target must succeed on a reaction roll, 13, or be hit by vines, taking 3d6 plus 2 physical damage. On a success, vines reach out from your hand, causing the chosen effect and temporarily restraining the target. Okay. One, no resource costs, which is huge for this. I love it. Uh, and then the two that I think really stand out to me is I don't know if I'm necessarily wanting to pull myself or the enemy close to me because we're a little bit squishier, but uh, constricting the target and forcing them to mark 2 stress is a really nice feature, especially if you're fighting a boss. Stress is how the GM uses some of an adversary's additional abilities or more heavy hitting abilities. So reducing the resources they have is huge. Now, the other thing I like about this is that this also creates sort of an area of effect attack as well. And that's going to be doing 3d6 plus 2 physical damage. So this might be the one I would maybe look at using instead of our fireflies when we hit level 4. But just something to keep in mind. This does also only do physical damage, so if you're fighting things that have resistant, just be wary of that. But on a success, vines reach out from your hands, causing the chosen effect and temporarily restraining the target. So again, this is going to be a restraint. So there's a couple of things to think of here. One is there's no way I'm having vines come from my hand. I am firing an arrow and this thing is going to just like explode out with all these like entangling shrouds that are just this massive death grip. So that's one. Flavor's free. The other thing is that at this point in time, we already have 5 domain cards. We've got 2 from our level 2, 2 from our initial start, and then we also have 1 from our level 3. So now we have to swap something out. And if I'm going to be swapping something out, I'm more than likely going to be swapping out Vicious Entangle. And the reason being is because that damage just doesn't really scale up very well. And this is, I think, if the Arcane Archer or the Sage domain in general has one sort of critique that I have, is that as you level up, these abilities don't always, carry over with you. So they're going to feel really good for 3 or 4 levels, which is 30 or 40% of your campaign, but they don't necessarily hit us hard in the end game. So we're going to want to be replacing these with things that are a little bit more appropriate for the tier that we're in. I guess that's the best way to put it. As you can see with Vicious Entangle, it does do physical damage like the other one, but it's a 1d8 plus 1 and there's no scaling on it. So I think that one's got to maybe sit in the back pocket because this new one still restrains the target and does much more physical damage to multiple enemies around. At level 5, we are going to take a multi-class dip. So we're going to go ahead and mark these 2 slots, all right? And we're going to cross out the take an upgraded subclass for this tier. So let me talk about this multi-class dip for just a quick second before I tell you what it is. I really do enjoy the Wayfinder specialization feature. Basically what it does is that when you have an enemy that is your focus and they make an attack against you, you get a +2 evasion for your attack. So this is fantastic. Again, increases our evasion. Those are all things that we want for this character. But more than anything, we want to make sure that we are still maintaining that Arcane Archer theme. So at this point in the story, maybe your character has decided that they need to become more in touch with nature in order to strengthen their arcane energy and prowess. And so for whatever reason you decide to take, we are going to be jumping into Druid. So the first thing that we're going to do is with Druids. So with the Druid multi-class, you get the ability to take something called a beast form. And there's going to be a number of different forms that you can take. And this is something that you could do if you felt like you wanted to or your character wanted. For me, it's not particularly something I think I would focus on with this character. If I did, it would be almost like maybe beast forming into some type of fey creature, right? Maybe just replace some of the ones that they give you. That's an option. And their class hope feature is called evolution, where you can spend 3 hope and then don't have to mark a stress to do a beast form. I don't want to go too much into detail because again, it's not something I see this particular character doing, but there is something that we are going to be taking that is going to be very, very valuable for us. And the subclass we're going to be taking for the Druid is the Warden of the Elements. So Warden of the Elements, You get Elemental Incarnation. You mark a stress to channel one of the following elements until you take severe damage or until your next rest. So, fire. When an adversary within melee range deals damage to you, they take 1d10 magic damage. Earth. They gain a bonus to your damage threshold equal to your proficiency. Water. When you deal damage to an adversary with melee range, all the other adversaries within very close range must mark a stress. And finally, and the one that we are most excited about, is going to be air. And you can hover, gaining advantage on agility rolls. Now, here's the thing about multiclassing in Daggerheart, is that as you can see, usually the spell cast trait would be instinct, but because we are multiclassing, we have the ability to use our original spell cast trait, which is agility. So what this means for us is that by taking the uh, Word of the Elements feat, we now can spend a stress and get advantage on all of our agility rolls, reaction rolls, attack rolls with our bow, and spellcast rolls because our spellcast trait is agility. So I want you to think of it this way. Where we're at right now with this character is we have a +3 to hit, and then if we add advantage, that's another 3.5 to hit. So we, on average, are getting 6.5% added to the roll on our duality dice. That is massive for us. And what I love about it is that it's not just for our physical attacks with our bow or maybe our magical attacks that we're making from the sage domain, it's for all of it. As I previously sort of hinted to, the Sage domain doesn't do a good job at creating a magical attack that sort of scales with us. And for me, I wanted us to have something that hit home with the arcane flavor, but it also sort of scaled up with us because right now we really don't have that. We're kind of outgrowing the damage on some of our abilities. And so for me, I think Unleash Chaos is the domain card we're going to take from the Arcana domain because we get to take one domain card when we multi-class. At the beginning of a session, place a number of tokens equal to your spellcast trait on this card. You make a spellcast roll against a target within far range and spend any number of tokens to channel raw energy from within yourself to unleash against them. On a success, you roll a number of d10s equal to the tokens you spent and deal that much magic damage to the target. You mark a stress to replenish this card with tokens up to your spellcast trait. At the end of each session, clear all unspent tokens. Okay. Here's why I really like this is one, this feature we automatically get at the start of every session. So as of right now, we get 3d10 that we are going to just basically have to use when we need to. And this is going to increase with our agility, which is fantastic. The other thing I like about it is that it's flexible in how we spend these. If we are maybe attacking a horde or a minion, we might only use one of these d10s and save the other two. But the other thing that's nice is that we could just unload all three d10s on one enemy, and that right there is 15.5 points of damage, which isn't anything to sneeze at. And it's magical damage. So what we now have is we have a sort of consistent magical attack that we can make if we're fighting that enemy that has resistance and we're using just an improved bow or something like that at this point. So really awesome. And I think that this multi-class feature really hits home with the arcane elemental theme that we're trying to have with the Arcane Archer. At level 6, we are going to be increasing our agility and our finesse. Additionally, we are going to be increasing our stress slots. So now we have 10 stress slots, which is going to feel good because we have so many things that we can do. We can increase the proficiency from our uh, uh, Wayfinder subclass feat. We can use that defensively with if an enemy makes an attack against us. So we've got a lot of different resources that we have. What I also like is that now, because we have a 4 to our agility, we get an extra d10 for the Unleash Chaos. And you know that when I use Unleash Chaos, I'm going to be using my bow to deliver that devastating hit to those adversaries. As for the domain card that we're going to be taking, with our consistent magical damage ability on lockdown, we are going to be continuing our path in the bone domain. And so the ability that I'm going to recommend we take, or the domain card that I'm going to recommend we take, is going to be Redirect. When an attack made against you from beyond melee range fails, roll a number of d6s equal to your proficiency. If any roll is a 6, you can mark a stress to redirect the attack to damage an adversary within very close range instead. So this is a nice feature because it's a couple reasons. One, our proficiency is 3, so we're going to roll 3d6. And if one of those is a 6, then we get to mark a stress and make that damage attack a different adversary or any adversary within close range. What I like about this is that this only works if we succeed. So we could use this all the time. And if we get to mark a stress and get to actually put some HP damage out on an enemy, I think that that's totally worth it. So this is a really nice feature, and it marries well with our other defensive feature that if an enemy from beyond melee range attacks us, we can mark a stress to see if it misses. Now, it might be pretty steep to mark 2 stress to miss the attack and redirect it, but you could do it. So just something to note. Now, some of you might be asking, well, how come we didn't take rapid riposte? And I think that there is a case to take that here. Basically, what happens with rapid riposte is that when an attack made against you within melee range fails, you can mark a stress and seize the opportunity to deal the weapon damage of one of your active weapons to the attacker. Now, I think this probably is going to be doing more damage. When it says weapon damage, I'm assuming we get to use our proficiency, but I'm not quite clear on that. If someone in the comments wants to let me know if that's the case, this is good. But remember, our character is really not trying to get into melee, so we're more than likely going to be being attacked from range. Hopefully, that's the case. But if we are, then I think the other ability is going to be able to proc much more often for us. But this one is nice as well because then we don't have to, roll d6s for a chance for it to hit. We've already got a lot of uses for our stress, so I just think it's important to know that this is another viable option, and feel free to take it if you want. So level 7, I think there is really only one clear path to take at level 7, and that is going to be increasing our proficiency by +1. So we're going to use our entire level 7 level up to get an additional damage die when we hit with our bow or any ability that uses our proficiency. There is a part of my soul that hurts a little bit by leaving that extra little stress here in this level up tier, but I think it's going to be worth it for all the things that we've done. I mean, if you multi-classing in Daggerheart does come with a little bit of a steeper cost because you have to use an entire level up to get access to a different class feature. So just keep that in note, but I feel like we are in a really good spot with everything that we have going on so far. Now, for our level 7 feature, we are going to be taking Bone Touched. I absolutely love this domain card, so let's see what it says. With Bone Touched, when 4 or more of the domain cards in your loadout are from the Bone domain, you gain the following: +1 bonus to agility. Once per rest, you can spend 3 hope to cause an attack that succeeded against you to fail instead. This is absolutely awesome, and I'm a huge fan of this because this increases our agility by 1. So at level 7, our agility is a +4 right now. So this makes it a +5. So not only does it make it so our attacks are hitting more often, but now this also gives us an additional D10 to use with Unleash Chaos, making our sustained magic damage much more sustainable. So huge fan of this feature. And then of course, being able to make an attack just miss if we have the hope. That's fantastic. Don't know how often we're using that because we're probably going to be thinning out the horde with our bow. So that's just the reality. Uh, Back at level 3, our evasion increased by 1 due to our untouchable feature, which is evasion goes up by half of your agility. So at 3, it is 1.5, but so that always rounds up. So now that our evasion is 5, it is going to be 2.5 on average. And so that is increasing our evasion up to 17, which feels fantastic. I'm sorry, 18. So at level 8, we are officially in tier 4. So we get an increase to our proficiency. So that's fantastic. So now we have a 5 to our proficiency, and we are back to our regularly scheduled programming of increasing our proficiency by +1 with that first level up. So now our proficiency is sitting at 6, and if we use our subclass feature to mark a stress and increase it, we can actually have that be as high as 7. So that is fantastic for where we're sitting heading into level 8. Now, there are a bunch of really good options that we can choose as from the bone domain, but I think the one that we have to take is going to be Cruel Precision. And what this does is when you make a successful attack with a weapon, you gain a bonus to your damage roll equal to either your finesse or agility. Now, for us, our agility is 5. So that means when we make attacks, we are doing an extra +5 to the damage output. And what I really like is that this also applies to when we use the break the horde feature for our class. So if we can hit 3 adversaries by spending 3 hope, we are doing an extra 15 points of damage universally across all the adversaries. And that is huge for us. So level 8 is a really big power spike for us. Now, the bummer is that this only counts on weapon attacks. So when we use Unleash Chaos, it's not going to necessarily work on that, but you can't win them all. At level 9, we are going to be topping out our agility and our finesse. And that's going to make it so our agility is going to be a 6 and our finesse is going to be a +4. So this is fantastic because of the fact that we now have an agility of +6. That's a flat +6 modifier to all of our spell cast and attack rolls with our bow, which is huge. It's also an extra 1d10 damage increase for our Unleash Chaos. So by having this, and that's why Bone Touch I think is so important for this character, if you take 5d5 times 6, that is 33 points of magic damage that you can do for marking really only 1 stress, which is fantastic. And again, you can split that up between however many that you want, which is huge. I think that when we look at this character and what we need to do, or at this point, I want to increase that stress because we have so many things that take stress. We just want to make sure that we have as much of that resource as possible available to use. As for the domain card that I want to take right now is called Splintering Strike. And I think that this card is just awesome. So let's read about it. You spend a hope and make an attack. You spend a hope and make an attack against all adversaries within your weapon's range. Once per long rest, on a success against any targets, roll the weapon's damage and distribute that damage however you wish between the targets you succeed against. Before you deal damage to each target, roll an additional damage die and add its results to the damage you deal to them. This is huge. Okay. So, one, this is kind of like your class feature, Break the Horde, but on steroids. It's 1 hope, and what's nice about it is it just hits against all adversaries within your weapon's range. Remember, we are using a bow. That means everybody within far range is going to be taking this damage. So if there are 5 enemies, we are rolling damage dice on all 5 of those enemies. Remember, we now have a +6 to our proficiency, and we get the ability to roll an additional damage dice. So we are rolling 7d6 against the enemies plus whatever modifier we have or whatever weapon you're using, right? I don't, know what weapons you're going to be getting in your campaign. That is up to your DM. So I just kind of use the baseline weapons because those increase by like a +3 for every tier play. Okay. So that is fantastic. And the cool thing is that you get to distribute the damage however you need to, right? So you can kind of figure out, okay, if the boss is maybe one of those 5 targets that I've hit, maybe I want 40 points of damage to go to him, and then I want 20 to go to these other ones, or however much it is, or 15 to these ones. So that way you're really trying to hit your severe damage threshold. The other thing I would look at doing is I would look at using one of our proficiency increases, marking stress, for one target to get a +7, just to try to get that damage up a little bit. However, at this point, I don't know if that's the best use of our stress, simply because we could be using Unleash Chaos with one of those stress, and that's 33 points of damage, right? So kind of use it however you will, but I think this is fantastic and really kind of paints that archery master when you use this ability. At level 10, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be taking a +1 bonus to our evasion. This is pushing our evasion to a 19. And if we are still using the feature where we can mark a stress and increase our evasion by 1d4 from an attack made outside of melee range, that's fantastic. This final level up feature that I'm going to have may come as a surprise to you. But what we're going to do is we're going to take an additional domain card to have access from our lower level. So let's go into the domain cards that we're going to take because we get 2 of them at level 10 now. So in order for this to make sense, I'm going to show you what our capstone feature is. So our capstone feature that we're going to take is called Swift Step. It's a level 10 bone domain card. And what it says is that when an attack made against you fails, you clear a stress. If you can't clear a stress, gain a hope. This is why we wanted our evasion to be so high, because we are such a stressed out character. We need to have an additional way besides rolling a critical or taking a rest to get our stress back. And this just makes it so we can do that. If an enemy misses us, we now get to reduce that stress, which is huge, right? Now, the reason I decided to take a second domain card, I want to go back and take Rapid Riposte if we didn't take that before. Couple reasons for this. One is, again, remember, this says that when an attack made against you from melee range fails, you can mark a stress and seize the opportunity to deal weapon damage with one of your active weapons. If you work with your GM and they do allow you to use your proficiency with your weapon damage, this is huge. But there's also another reason why. We have so many cards in our bone domain that we might have to be swapping out and using stress to get the one that we need to. This has a stress cost of 0. And that's important because this means that we can keep this in our back pocket. And if we are fighting an enemy that is just focusing on us, maybe we swap out one of those other ones for this one so that we can get some damage on some of these melee characters, right? So having a 0 stress swap, I think, is fantastic. It's almost like this is just a reaction card that you get. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to take this. That's it. That is the Arcane Archer. I hope you guys enjoyed this build. It was something that was a little bit tougher because the Sage domain doesn't have any powerhouse techniques at the very end. And I also want to talk a little bit about why we didn't continue down the Sage domain for a couple of reasons. One is going to be that I didn't really feel like there was a ton of options that were really valuable for us. And I think there's some standouts where people would say, well, Coleman, what about Wild Surge? Wild Surge basically makes it so, you have a D6 and you start with the 1, and then every time you make an action roll, you add that number to your spellcast roll until you get to a 6, right? Um, you actually add to every action roll as I'm kind of reading through it. But when you do the math on that, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 divided by 6 is 3.5. So we could have this feature that we mark a stress to activate, and then once we're done, we mark another stress to activate. Or we could have just multi-classed into Druid, taking the Warden of the Elements feature, mark 1 stress, and now we have 3.5 on average to every attack we make. So that was sort of my logic there. And then when you looked at some of the other ones, it's just nothing really damage-wise stuck out until Force of Nature. And Force of Nature is a pretty cool one. When you succeed on an attack roll, you get a +10 to the damage roll, which is great. There's some other things. You can't be restrained. When you defeat an enemy within close range, you get an armor slot. And it's kind of this cool, big, hulking sort of monstrosity that you turn into, or however you want it to be. But what happens is, before you make an action roll, you have to spend a hope. If you can't, you revert back to your normal form. So if you only have 3 hope, you get to make 3 attacks with this. And so you're burning through hope and you're burning through stress. It just didn't seem, somewhat optimal or even on theme with what we're doing for the Arcane Archer. The final one that everyone might be saying, well, Coleman, what about Tempest? It's a really powerful spell. And I would agree with you. It does have some pretty good effects, and the GM does have to spend a fear to turn some of those features off. But if you just look at the damage on average, Hurricane 3d10 plus 10, that's like, let's see, 15, 16.5 points of damage plus 10, 26 points of damage. When if we just mark a stress and load up on Unleash Chaos, we're doing 33 points of damage, right? So again, I think that there are some nuances, and if you feel like taking Tempest would have put you really on point with the Arcane Archer, especially because we took Ward of the Elements, I say go ahead and do it. But for me, we wanted to create at first the most deadly archer we can, and I think we did that. But also still making it so those elements that you had from Ward of the Elements still come in every time you pull the bow back and fire. So that was some of my logic by not continuing down the Sage domain. I just don't think that that domain in particular does a good job in giving you abilities that increase with your proficiency. So, and I could be wrong. These are just my thoughts on it. So play it however you want to. But thanks again, and looking forward to doing the next video. And love to hear about what you guys have maybe done or something that could even make this build better. And to put this into perspective, I think that this is really key. When you think about what we've done for our agility, we now have a +6 to our agility, and we get advantage on that. So that is going to be 9.5 increase on average to our agility rolls. So to put this into perspective, when you look at the adversaries, they have a difficulty of 18 at tier 4, even like the big heavy hitting boss ones, right? So what that means is just you have to roll a 9 on your duality die in order to hit them with all the features that we have on average, right? with all the adds that we have, the +6 to our agility, the 3.5 to with advantage, and what you roll on average of a 13 on the duality die, your average roll is going to be 22.5, which is 4.5 higher than most adversary, tier 4 adversary difficulties. So you're going to be hitting as often as possible. So I think that this is also a reason why when you factor in those, class hope features like Break the Horde, where you are hitting multiple enemies at once, that's huge. Sorry, I've been saying Break the Horde this whole time. I think that's the D&D Ranger feature that they have. It's hold them off. So same concept though. You're holding them off, breaking the horde, you're doing it all. So um, but I really hope that you guys enjoyed this Arcane Archer build. Let me know in the comments below what build you would like to see next. Until next time, I hope that you roll with hope.